The first time I caught him, he was wearing my mother's old silk nightgown, standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m., humming a lullaby I hadn't heard since I was a child. The moonlight spilled through the window, painting his silhouette in silver, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Then he turned, and those eyes, dark, endless, and impossibly familiar, locked onto mine, unraveling every defense I'd ever built. My name is Caleb Monroe, a 28-year-old graphic designer living in a cramped San Francisco apartment with too many plants and not enough sunlight. I'd always been the quiet type, steady job, steady life, no surprises. That is, until Javier Ruiz moved into the apartment across the hall. Javier, 30, a freelance photographer with a laugh that could melt winter and a knack for showing up exactly when I didn't expect him. He was chaos in human form, always carrying a camera, always chasing light, always leaving a trail of warmth in his wake. And somehow, he'd decided I was his next project. It started innocently enough. A knock on my door at midnight, Javier holding a plate of half-burned empanadas, claiming he'd accidentally made too many. Then came the late-night talks on the fire escape, his stories of growing up in Miami clashing with my tales of quiet Vermont winters. But 3 months ago, something shifted. I started waking up to strange signs. A scarf I didn't own draped over my couch, the faint scent of lavender in my bedroom, dishes I hadn't touched washed and stacked. At first, I thought I was losing it. Then I found the nightgown. That night, standing in my kitchen, Javier didn't flinch when I caught him. "Caleb," he said, voice soft but unapologetic, "you looked like you needed someone to take care of you." He stepped closer, the hem of the nightgown brushing his knees, and I swear my heart forgot its rhythm. I should have been angry, should have demanded answers, but all I could do was stare, caught between confusion and something dangerously close to longing. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a one-time thing. A quirk, a joke, maybe a performance art piece for his photography. Javier was eccentric. I'd seen him stage fake weddings in Golden Gate Park for aesthetic vibes. But it didn't stop. Every few nights, I'd find him there, slipping into my apartment, wearing something soft and borrowed, tidying my life like he belonged in it. He'd hum, cook, fold my laundry, and leave before dawn. And every time, he'd whisper, "You deserve this, Caleb," like it was a vow. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? My best friend, Aisha, would have laughed until she cried, then demanded a TED Talk on boundaries. My therapist would have called it a red flag. But the truth? I didn't want it to stop. There was something about Javier's quiet care, his strange, intimate ritual, that filled a void I hadn't known existed. Growing up black and queer in a small town, I'd learned to keep my heart locked tight. Vulnerability was a luxury I couldn't afford. Yet here was Javier, picking the lock with every stolen moment. One night, I waited up. The clock ticked past midnight, and when I heard the soft click of my door, I was ready. Javier froze in the doorway, this time in a pale blue robe, his camera slung around his neck like always. "You're awake," he said, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. "The sneaking, the clothes, the everything. What's it for?" He set the camera down, slow and deliberate, like he was choosing his words as carefully as he framed a shot. "Because you're always carrying the world, Caleb. I see it. How you hold everyone else together. I just wanted to be the one holding you for once." His words hit like a freight train. I wanted to argue, to tell him I didn't need saving, but my throat tightened, and all I could manage was, "You're insane." He laughed, soft and warm, and stepped closer until I could feel the heat of him, the faint scent of lavender clinging to the robe. "Maybe," he said, eyes searching mine, "but I'm your kind of insane." That was the night I let him stay, not just in my apartment, but in my orbit, closer than I'd ever let anyone get. We didn't talk about it. Not the nightgown, not the sneaking, not the way his hand brushed mine and stayed there. Instead, we cooked together, his laughter filling the silence. And for the first time in years, my apartment felt like a home. But secrets like ours don't stay quiet forever. A week later, Aisha caught Javier leaving my place at dawn, still in one of my oversized sweaters, and her raised eyebrow could have cut glass. "Caleb," she said, cornering me at our usual coffee shop, "you're going to need to explain why your neighbor's playing house in your clothes." I fumbled through half-truths, but Aisha wasn't buying it. "This isn't cute, it's weird," she said, her voice softening with worry. "What's he running from? Or worse, what are you running from?" Her words stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my bliss. Javier's visits grew bolder. He'd linger longer, leave notes tucked into my books, even slip Polaroids of us under my pillow. Each one was a snapshot of a life I hadn't dared imagine. Us laughing on the fire escape, my head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing patterns on my wrist. But Aisha's question echoed. What was Javier running from? And why did it feel like he was pulling me into his escape? The truth unraveled on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of San Francisco downpour that makes you question why anyone lives here. I came home to find Javier sitting on my couch. No nightgown, no camera, just him in a plain black hoodie, staring at a crumpled letter in his hands. His eyes were red, and for the first time, he looked small, like the world had finally caught up to him. "Caleb," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." I sat across from him, my heart pounding like it knew what was coming. He handed me the letter, and I recognized the logo immediately, a legal firm in Miami. It was a restraining order dated 6 months ago, addressed to Javier from someone named Marco Delgado. My stomach twisted as I read the details. Harassment, threats, a court date he'd skipped. Javier had fled Miami, left everything behind, and landed here, in my hallway, in my life. Marco was my ex, he said, eyes fixed on the floor. We were together for 3 years. I thought it was love, but it was control. He wanted to own me, my art, my time, my soul. When I tried to leave, he made sure I'd lose everything. I wanted to reach for him, but my hands stayed frozen. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the words heavy with betrayal. "Because I didn't want you to see me like that," he said, voice cracking. "Broken, running. I wanted to be someone who could give you something, not just take. The nightgown, the sneaking, the care, it wasn't a game. It was Javier rebuilding himself, piece by piece, in the safety of my world. He'd been pretending, not just for me, but for himself, trying to become someone who could love without fear. And I'd let him, because deep down, I was pretending too, pretending I could keep my heart safe while falling for him." I reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. "You don't have to pretend with me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But you can't keep running either." He nodded, tears spilling over, and for the first time, I saw him, not the charming photographer, not the midnight caretaker, but Javier, raw and real. We sat there, rain pounding against the windows, and I knew we were crossing a line we couldn't uncross. The next few weeks were a blur of cautious hope. Javier stopped sneaking in at night, but he didn't stop showing up. We'd walk through the Mission District, sharing tacos and stories, his camera capturing moments I'd never noticed before. The way light hit a mural, the curve of my smile when I thought he wasn't looking. He started opening up about Marco, how the control had crept in slowly, how he'd lost friends, his art, his sense of self. I told him about my own scars, the ones I'd buried under years of playing it safe. We were two broken things, finding each other in the cracks. But Marco wasn't a ghost we could outrun. One evening, I found a note slipped under my door, typed and unsigned. "He's mine. You're just borrowing him." My blood ran cold. Javier was at a gallery show that night, his first since moving to San Francisco, and I'd promised to meet him there. I grabbed my coat and ran. The note crumpled in my fist, fear clawing at my chest. The gallery was crowded, buzzing with art snobs and cheap wine. Javier stood in the center, his photographs lining the walls, vibrant, raw, alive. But his smile faltered when he saw me, sensing the panic in my eyes. I pulled him aside and showed him the note. His face drained of color, and for a moment, I thought he'd bolt. "He's here," Javier whispered, scanning the crowd. "He's been watching me." We left the gallery, slipping out the back into an alley slick with rain. I held his hand, grounding him, grounding myself. "We'll figure this out," I said, though I had no idea how. All I knew was that I wasn't letting him face this alone. The next morning, we went to the police. Javier's hands shook as he recounted Marco's history, stalking, threats, the restraining order he'd violated by coming to California. The officer was sympathetic but blunt. Without proof Marco was in San Francisco, there wasn't much they could do. "Get a security system," she said, "and stay vigilant." Vigilant. The word felt like a cage. I installed cameras outside my apartment, changed the locks, and convinced Javier to stay with me until we knew it was safe. He agreed, but I could see the weight of it, the fear that he'd brought this danger to my door. I didn't care. I'd spent too long keeping people at arm's length. I wasn't losing him now. Living together changed everything. Javier's presence filled my space, not just with his laughter or his endless cups of coffee, but with a quiet intimacy I hadn't known I craved. We'd fall asleep on the couch, his head on my chest, his camera forgotten on the table. But the notes kept coming, each one colder, sharper. "You can't keep him. He'll always come back to me." I started checking the cameras obsessively, jumping at every shadow. One night, Javier broke. We were cooking dinner, his abuela's recipe for arroz con pollo, when he dropped a pan, rice scattering across the floor. "I can't do this to you," he said, voice raw. "I should leave. Before he hurts you." "No," I said, grabbing his shoulders. "You don't get to decide that for me. We're in this together." He looked at me, eyes searching for a reason to believe, and I kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't perfect, just desperate and real, like everything between us. He kissed me back, and for a moment, the world was just us, no notes, no ghosts, no fear. But reality doesn't let you hide for long. The next day, Aisha called, her voice tight with urgency. She'd been at a bar in the Castro when she overheard a guy, tall, mid-30s, with a Miami accent, asking about Javier. "He didn't say his name," she said, "but he showed a photo. It was you too, Caleb." From the gallery. We decided to act. Javier reached out to an old friend in Miami, a lawyer named Elena, who'd helped him file the restraining order. She promised to dig into Marco's whereabouts and push for an arrest if he'd violated parole. Meanwhile, I convinced Javier to stay visible, keep posting his art online, keep showing up at galleries. Hiding would only let Marco win. The plan worked, but not without cost. Javier's next show was a hit, but every stranger's glance felt like a threat. I started noticing things, a car parked too long outside my building, a shadow lingering in the alley. Paranoia crept in, but so did determination. I wasn't just protecting Javier. I was fighting for the life we were building, fragile as it was. Then came the night that changed everything. We were walking home from a late-night diner, Javier's hand in mine, when a figure stepped out of the fog. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that burned with something I couldn't name. Marco. He didn't say a word, just stood there, blocking our path. Javier froze, his grip tightening on my hand. "Caleb," Marco said, his voice low and venomous. "You should have stayed out of this." I stepped in front of Javier, heart pounding but voice steady. "You don't get to do this," I said. "Not here. Not ever." Marco laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. You think you know him? He said, eyes flicking to Javier. He's mine. Always will be. Javier's voice broke through, small but fierce. I was never yours, Marco. Not then, not now. The street was empty, the fog swallowing any hope of help. I could feel Javier trembling behind me, but he didn't back down. Neither did I. Marco took a step forward, and I braced myself, ready for whatever came next. But then lights. A patrol car rounded the corner, its siren cutting through the silence. Marco's face twisted, and he bolted into the fog. The police didn't catch him that night, but the encounter was enough to push things forward. Elena's work paid off. Marco had violated parole, and with our statements in the notes, they issued a warrant. 2 weeks later, he was arrested in Oakland, trying to board a bus back to Miami. Javier cried when he got the call, not out of fear, but relief, a weight he'd carried for years finally lifting. We didn't go back to normal, because normal was never the point. Javier moved in for good, his camera a permanent fixture on my coffee table, his laughter a constant in my days. The nightgown stayed in the closet, a quiet reminder of how we'd found each other, in the strangest, most beautiful way. Aisha, ever the skeptic, finally gave her blessing, though she still teased me about my weird boyfriend's domestic cosplay. One evening, under that same oak tree in the park where we'd first let ourselves hope, Javier pulled out his camera. "One more shot," he said, grinning. The Polaroid captured us, me, with my arm around him, looking at me like I was his whole world. On the back, he wrote, "We made it." The world didn't stop being messy. I still wrestled with my walls, Javier with his scars. But we'd learned something. Love isn't about being unbroken. It's about choosing someone, again and again, even when the past tries to claw you back. Javier had pretended to be my wife at night, but in the end, he became my home. And no matter what came next, I knew I'd never make him stop.